subject, I really wanted to discuss the emergence of political parties and factions from 1783 to 1815 and how this would impact the sort of ever-going constitutional debate at the time. A key development of this time period is going to exist within the emergence of Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and mainly their reactions to the Constitution, with the Federalists supporting the Constitution strongly and the Anti-Federalists critiquing the Constitution. Key figures of the Federalists are going to be Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison, authoring the Federalist Papers under the collective pseudonym Fluvius. These guys are going to be very pro-national government, believing that the Articles of Confederation, as they were originally written, were much too weak for the survival of a nation. They also championed having a much stronger national government. Very different views overall. Although there were definitely some notable figures within the Anti-Federalist Party, they were much less organized, and at that being disadvantaged, especially having varying views among different authors. Anti-Federalists strongly critiqued the Constitution for lacking protection for individual rights, like i.e. a Bill of Rights, and also for having such a strong federal government that overrides state rights, being almost authoritarian in nature. Many Anti-Federalists feared tyranny, and many critiqued the Constitution for almost having a pseudo-monarchy, the structure that they had just fought against in the Revolution. So the Federalists and Anti-Federalists would attract and consist of many people belonging to certain professions at this time due to their core values. The Federalists, alongside prioritizing a really strong national government, would also really focus on commerce and manufacturing, which is going to attract merchants, manufacturers, shippers, bankers, and consumers within a local market. Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, prioritized much more farmers and small-scale manufacturing, and this focus on agrarian economy is really going to appeal to state politicians and rural farmers, mainly farmers who were impacted the most and needed those legal protections not really listed in the Constitution, and those who were in favor of like a fiat currency, Federalists were also pro-British, and the Anti-Federalists were pro-French. This will be important later. When the tonnage duties came out in July 1790, Madison's original proposal was going to cost 30 cents less as fees for France because we had a trade treaty with them that we were supposed to abide to. It was ultimately rejected by Hamilton, who was a Federalist, who wanted to maintain a relationship with Britain, and this would really upset France because we weren't upholding ourselves to the trade treaty we had originally signed, meaning that they didn't get that lower cost that we had agreed to give them. So the Anti-Federalists would be renamed the Democratic Republicans, but the Democratic Republicans as a party would soon evolve into something slightly different than the Anti-Federalists. So not the exact same values, although sharing a history. So Democratic Republicans, also known as Jeffersonian Republicans, because of their support of Thomas Jefferson, would support states' rights, a very strict constitutional interpretation to keep it in like what the founders had in mind. Also, they were very, like Anti-Federalists, they were very wary of centralized power and how this would impact smaller states specifically, and just this really big impact on states' rights within this federal government. It's important to note that there's going to be a lot of contention between the Jeffersonian Republicans and the Federalists at this time. For specific examples of this fragmentation within political views at this time, you can compare the works of John Fenno, a Federalist, and Philip Fenno, a Republican, as listed in the pledges. John wrote for the Gazette, sort of becoming a very Federalist newspaper, and Philip wrote for the National Gazette, being a very Republican paper, and this would turn into a very bitter rivalry between the two publications, both as political enemies and just as enemies in general. These newspapers were very important during this time because things like almanacs and the Gazette and National Gazette were a way to provide political information and disseminate news to people who typically wouldn't have access. Like if you're not a senator, or if you're not in a position of government, you're not really going to get to go to the Philadelphia Convention. So putting it in a newspaper was a really huge way for many citizens to get their information. Furthermore, for political parties, it is very important to note that the Federalist Party would sort of face their demise due to their opposition of the War of 1812. Walter Borman's 1812, A War That Forged a Nation, does a really excellent job of describing just how the Federalist Party's opposition to the War of 1812 would lead to them losing a lot of support as a political party. Really make sure to highlight the Hartford Convention as a huge blow to their reputation and opinion, with many perceiving it as a sort of quasi-secessionist meeting. Borman also discusses how Theodore Dwight kind of went out of his way to claim that the Federalists did not support secession and how this was never officially mentioned. This almost overreaction on Dwight's part, combined with the lack of formal record, really made people question the fidelity of the party and made them feel as if there was something to conceal, further exacerbating the huge negative view on this party. The War of 1812 also did lead to a big surge of patriotism within many people, which would contribute to Democratic Republicans, who were obviously in opposition to Federalists, who were very unpopular at that time. After 1815, there is obviously going to be a split between the Democrats and Republicans and the evolution of those parties overall, but that is after the contents of this class. Understanding the emergence of American political factions is essential to our understanding of the early republic overall because of how important and how prevalent these political parties were during this time in history and during history afterwards, because politics would shape our economy, it would shape our society, it would shape our trade relations, it would shape our policies due to law, legislature, human rights. Everything is going to be shaped by the policies and overall legal actions taken during this time through the respective parties. All of this is really why I would say that my understanding of the early American Republic has improved exponentially compared to my time prior to this class, because before this course I was not very well versed in American politics or in American culture prior to 1864 really much at all. I had a rudimentary understanding, but I didn't quite grasp just how much of a conflict there was between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists themselves and how they shaped culture around it. Another thing that really helped my understanding was our assigned readings. So Midwife's Tale was really eye-opening for me to read, because it isn't very common to get such good first-hand experiences for someone who is like a middle-class, working-class person at this time, you know, because they might not typically be as well-preserved. So to have the first-hand account of a woman who is also so important and prevalent within her community, and such a tight-knit community at that, you not only gain her perspective, but the perspective of everyone else around her as well. It really teaches you so much about early American economy, politics, sexism within midwiferys and doctors, and everything else encompassing the period that I think no other document can do in such an eloquent way.